This is Northwest Reports. I'm Sarah Bernard.
And I'm Maliha Sayed.
The 2024 election marked a clear Republican victory.
Republicans have officially swept the election.
Not only did Donald Trump retake the White House and Republicans regain control of Congress, but the entire country took a big step to the right compared to 2020. From swing states to blue states, cities to suburbs. Not in Washington, though.
From the top of the ticket, down the ballot, it appears to be a blue wave in Washington.
Washington had the smallest rightward shift of all 50 states, just a fraction of a percent. And every statewide race went to Democrats.
Our next governor of the great state of Washington, Bob Ferguson!
Still, there is a big Republican presence in Washington state, and that includes a lot of enthusiasm for President-elect Donald Trump.
He loves America, and he's like our last chance.
So we wanted to know, what is it like to be a Republican right now, in one of the bluest states in the nation? What role has Trump played in Washington's Republican Party in the past decade? And where do Washington Republicans go from here?
This is the first of 3 episodes in a series we're calling The Elephant in the Room, where we take a look at this unique moment in time when Washington Republicans find themselves caught between national triumphs and local losses. Different factions of the party tussle over identity and strategy, while the polarizing force of Donald Trump looms as large as ever.
In this episode, you'll hear from a couple people we talked to before the election. They identify as Republicans, but they don't support Trump. In the next episode, we'll take you through some of the conversations we had at a Republican watch party in Bellevue on election night. And in the final episode, we'll catch up with the few Republicans post-election to talk about where things stand with Washington's GOP and what the future might hold. For the sake of time, I guess we could go ahead and just get started because we have a lot of questions.
Let me just say, just as selfless promotion, is I've written a short book about this. It's called The Fall of the Shining City, which lays out what I think happened to the Republican Party from roughly, forever.
Chris Vance is not a Republican, at least not anymore. He announced he was leaving the state party back in 2017. But that was in response to the direction he saw the party heading, not because he doesn't still consider himself Republican, at least in the Ronald Reagan or George Bush sense of the word. He's been looking for a political home ever since. A former chair of the state GOP, he started his career in Republican politics decades ago. So he's seen a lot when it comes to changes in the state party over time.
I joined college Republicans as a freshman at Western Washington University in the fall of 1980 and have been involved in the Republican Party ever since. The Washington State Republican Party has a long history going back to, post-World War II, of being dominated by moderates. There were always the far right, the people who thought the party should be closer to where it is now, under Donald Trump, but they were never in charge. We would fight vicious battles for control of the party, and we would win, the moderates. The Dan Evanses, the Slade Gortons, the Joel Pritchards, John Spellman, through Jennifer Dunn, Rob McKenna, Dino Rossi, me. It was a long history of suburban moderates dominating the party. And because of that, the Republican Party in Washington state we were never the majority. This state has always leaned to the Democrats, but we were a viable, strong, credible opposition that sometimes could elect a governor, elect a senator. We elected several attorney general. We dominated the Secretary of State's office. We had the majorities off and on in the legislature. Back then, we were able to keep the far right at bay. I was elected state party chairman 3 times, and all 3 times I had people on the far right running against me. Slade Gorton had far right opposition every election, and he beat them. So all that came to an end with Donald Trump.
The beginning of the end of this era, however, didn't necessarily start with Trump. Vance says he first noticed a shift back in 2007.
I can pinpoint pretty exactly when it happened and what issue caused it. Republicans now, their number one driving issue is immigration. They want to stop immigration, not just illegal immigration. Donald Trump tried to slash legal immigration. They want to keep America white, flat out. But that was not our policy in the old days. I mean, President Reagan granted amnesty to millions of long-term immigrants who were here. The policy of the Republican Party was always comprehensive immigration reform, which had two major elements. Yes, border security, but then a path to legality for the long-term immigrants who were here, people who had come here, put down roots, had kids. And that is still, some moderate Republicans still have that position. But President Bush introduced an immigration reform bill to Congress, and talk radio and the far right went crazy.
You're on the air, sir. Go ahead.
I can't believe that our country is being sold out to people who have invaded our country.
And it kept growing. There was another immigration fight, I think, in 2009. Then you saw the rise of the Tea Party, the financial crisis, where the majority of Republicans defied the president and the Treasury Department and would not help save capitalism, by securing the banks. And that's when you started to see the populist right begin to overcome the Reaganite establishment. And it's just built and built from there.
It took a while for this trend to catch on in Washington, he says, but eventually it did. The arrival of Donald Trump was a big factor, and this, Vance believes, has had a devastating effect on Republicans' ability to win local and state elections here.
The moderates continued to control the party up until Trump. But what we saw is that Republicans now no longer could win or even come close because the national brand had become so toxic. There's two things on the ballot, your name and your party. And so we would continue to nominate suburban moderates like Rob McKenna, like Bill Bryant for governor. And every year they did worse and worse. Even in 2016, the Republican nominee for governor was Bill Bryant, and the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate was me. But after that, the 2018 election, especially the 2020 election, that's when you saw the takeover of the Republican Party in this state. Lauren Culp.
A small town police chief who has really become a celebrity in conservative circles.
And other candidates, then Semi Bird this year, and Dave Reichert, who disavows, who never really was a suburban moderate. And so they've taken over the party now completely, top to bottom. But it didn't happen until about 2020 in the state.
I mean, you've really mapped out this trajectory starting in 2007, but certainly this kind of more explosive moment happens in 2016 when Donald Trump becomes the nominee. Can you bring us back to that time? What were you thinking? What was your first reaction? Did you start talking about it publicly, like right away?
Oh, absolutely. I was the Republican nominee for the United States Senate. I was running against Patty Murray. We felt going into the race that after 8 years of Barack Obama, there might be, and we believed that Jeb Bush was going to be the Republican nominee. And we thought there might be a big Republican wave, which would give us a chance against Senator Murray. Well, with Trump, there was never a chance. But I told everybody who would listen that when he becomes the nominee, I'm going to tell the world that I won't support him. And so he won the Indiana primary sometime in early May and became the nominee. And I had a press conference in downtown Seattle the next day and saying, I will not vote for Donald Trump. And I just ripped him. My campaign stopped at that moment. The small dollar donations just stopped. Major donors canceled fundraisers. Democrats loved me. The media loved me, but they wouldn't vote for me. But Republicans just turned hard. Eventually, we stopped leaving the house because I'd go to campaign events and there'd be physical confrontations with Trump supporters. One was at the Republican booth at the Puyallup Fair. A Trump supporter actually put his hands on me, and things got tense for a few seconds. I wasn't welcome. They did not want anyone there who didn't support Trump, even though at the time a lot of rank and file Republicans didn't like Trump, but they hated that I was putting the party's divisions out in the public. And my thinking was, Trump is an abomination, but an aberration. He's going to lose, and then we can rebuild the party. And then when he won, then everything got even exponentially worse at that point. I always thought that the good, smart leaders in this party would all stand up together, if necessary, on the floor of the convention. The willingness of my former friends and colleagues to cave and give up and walk away and bend the knee and pledge loyalty to this monster has been the biggest shock of my adult life.
What do you think, if anything, has changed between then and now?
It's gotten worse, dramatically worse. I mean, it just, more and more people, either the people that with a conscience have left or been driven out. The rest now are either actively pro-Trump or they just have made their peace with it and will not oppose him. It is an absolute cult of personality at this point.
My understanding is in 2017, so pretty shortly after Trump becomes president, you made a public statement saying that you were leaving the Republican Party.
Yes.
What was behind your decision at the time to leave the party and to say that publicly?
Two things. 2017, I was looking for what to do next. Where is my tribe? Where are the survivors of this crash? Where are what I said, where is Yavin 4, the secret rebel base? That's a Star Wars reference. Where are we gathering? What's going on? And I was attracted to a movement that was at that time called the Centrist Project, then became known as Unite America, which was an attempt to basically form a political party to elect moderate independents. And then the second thing is, so many Republicans would say, I'm not going to let that guy drive me out of my party. I'm still the real Republican. But then when I looked at it and saw that the overwhelming majority of people who called themselves Republicans didn't agree with me, how can you be a member of a political party where most everyone disagrees with you? So if I'm going to go out and campaign for independence and I don't agree with the Republicans, I need to just say the words, I'm not a Republican anymore. Today, I don't know what I am. I'm really very active, super active in Republicans for Harris. And I always also said that I'm leaving the party. But if there is ever a real attempt to launch a fight to take the party back, I would mount up and ride to the sound of the guns and join that fight.
Although the kind of fight Vance is talking about here might sound extreme, there are some elements of it playing out right now in Washington. It's a lot more complex than this, but long story short, there are divisions between the far right and more moderate flanks of the state GOP, and between those who back Trump-aligned candidates and those who don't. To name one example, when the Washington State Republican Party held its annual convention in April, there was some drama.
Disorder and disarray. That's why gubernatorial candidate Dave Reichert says he no longer wants an endorsement from the GOP.
One of the biggest announcements on the last day of the Washington State GOP convention was the party's endorsement for governor. That went to Semi Bird, just one day after chaos erupted when the party announced they wouldn't endorse a candidate at all for the race.
Some called it a clown show.
Was it a clown show?
Well, yes. Yes.
In the end, state party delegates overwhelmingly endorsed candidates who supported Trump or were endorsed by Trump, and punished candidates who had, for instance, voted to impeach Trump while in Congress.
We were curious to hear Vance's take on all this, so we started off with a simple question. Were you there?
Are you kidding? I value my life. Why would I walk in that room? Oh, I'm not kidding. I wouldn't feel physically safe in that room.
I'm curious from your perspective, in Washington, do you think that convention signifies that there's a much bigger Trump presence than we would have thought? Or do you think that's a really loud minority of people?
Well, both things. People are shocked when they realize that Republicans in Washington are just like Republicans in Alabama. They're now, didn't used to be that way, but it is now. And they're all for Trump. The Republican Party is all in for Trump and other far-right candidates. They're completely out of step with the rest of the state. I mean, there's been a bunch of polls released this week that show catastrophic numbers for Republicans running statewide. They're going to lose every statewide race. They're probably going to lose a few more seats in the legislature. Donald Trump made the Republican Party much stronger in some parts of America, but not in Washington state. Because Washington state is one of the most highly college educated parts of America, socially tolerant, and in the whole West Coast. I mean, the party has been eviscerated on the West Coast.
What do you think happens to the Republican Party in Washington if Trump is reelected?
Death. Further death. I mean, they're already dead. What else can happen? They'll just continue to lose ground. If you're a Trump supporter and you really want to be a county chairman, you can get that done. But if you want to get elected to anything, I mean, if you look at all the seats in the legislature that Republicans have just abandoned, don't even fight for anymore, that just a few years ago were Republican seats, that's just going to continue until the Republican Party disavows Trump, makes a big break and says, we're done with MAGA, we're turning the page, we're going a different direction. That's the only way that Republicans become relevant again on the West Coast.
That was Chris Vance, former chair of the Washington State Republican Party. Everything you heard was from our conversation with him before the election, which he thought Kamala Harris would win. We checked in with him after the election, too. That'll be in part 3 of the series.
Of course, Vance stands very much on the outside of the GOP these days. But there are others who, although they share some of Vance's views, are working on things from within.
Deanna Martinez is chair of the Mainstream Republicans of Washington, an organization primarily made up of moderates.
We understand, the Republicans are the minority party in this state, but how can we work across the aisle and get certain things done for our communities? That's what's really important to us.
The group often uses former Governor Dan Evans as an example of the Republicanism it's aligned with. Evans, who passed away at the age of 98 this year, was known for his bipartisanship and support of causes such as environmental protection and refugee resettlement.
So maybe needless to say, Martinez finds herself in a strange position in the state party today. We spoke with her before the election, too. She, like Vance, believes that Donald Trump's influence has pushed the party to extremes, even though more moderate candidates tend to win in Washington.
It has trickled down in a negative way because every Republican that's running is a MAGA Republican, and that's not the case. But they instantly get labeled. So we have the left that we have to fight on that as far as, no, we're not MAGA. That doesn't mean that they're not going to vote Trump, but they're center or moderate. But then we have the Republican, far-right Republican, that says, you're not MAGA Trump either. You're not a complete Republican or a real Republican. So we're really fighting two sides. Unfortunately, one of our sides is our own group of people that we're supposed to agree with or live in the same community politically. And so it's been challenging for our candidates, meaning mainstream Republicans of Washington candidates. When you look at who got through the primaries, many of them are mainstream candidates. And I would love for the party that I say I affiliate with the most, the Republican Party, to understand that about Washington state politics.
Martinez didn't always vote Republican, so we wanted to know what led her to the GOP.
I sometimes have a hard time figuring out that moment. I know I was still voting the majority of the time, but I really felt like nobody was listening to me. Nobody was concerning themselves at the political level in office regarding a single mom, Mexican single mom in a rural area who supposedly was middle class because I'm a registered nurse, and yet that middle class designation went away. And if I have a good paying job, which I do as a registered nurse, what are all the other families doing? Especially when you consider where I live, we're like 40% Hispanic just in Moses Lake alone. So we have a fairly large Hispanic community in my district, both legislative and congressional district. And they tend to be lower wage earners. And if I was struggling, what was happening to them? And really, as I learned more about politics, I realized that, well, the continual addition of taxes, the added regulations, which increases the cost of doing business. It increases the cost of trying to afford a home. All those things affect my paycheck. And that's where I realized that the Republicans were looking out more for my pocketbook, which to me was my priority as a single mom.
These days, on top of her job as a nurse, Martina serves as a Moses Lake City Council member, as well as the Mainstream Republicans chair. She says the group doesn't take a stance on Trump and is mostly focused on getting Republicans elected in Washington. The group has even, at times, endorsed more Trump-friendly candidates, such as Tiffany Smiley and Phil Fortunato.
Still, when Martinez went to the state GOP convention this year, she got a somewhat icy reception.
I had attended for the very first time. And so it was definitely a learning process. I'm like, wow, this is what happens. But it was also a huge surprise to me that if you weren't in the majority, you weren't going to get heard.
She was taken aback, for instance, by how attendees responded to Commissioner of Public Lands candidate Jamie Herrera Butler, a former U.S. representative who voted to impeach Donald Trump in 2021.
Jamie, who, voted to impeach Trump, and so therefore, she got booed, and people turned their backs to her, which that's just not adult-like. It's not respectful, and that's the part where I hesitate to proudly say I'm Republican, because how is that acceptable? Why is that acceptable? I, in some ways, was hiding that I'm mainstream Republicans of Washington because I didn't want to have any issue with anybody. We had a booth there, and I had people come up to me and not be very kind.
In what way?
I happened to be located right next to Jamie's booth, and one gentleman had been at Jamie's table and then came over to my table, and he must have thought that I was not a Jamie fan. He didn't realize, who Mainstream had already endorsed, because Mainstream endorsed candidates before the state convention. And so he was going on about how he will never vote for her. She doesn't deserve the vote. And so I was trying to engage him in, what that really meant. And once he realized that I wasn't his kind of Republican, I was mainstream, he did get a little upset with me. His tone was a little bit louder, but he walked off, and I just left it because I'm gonna stand for who we support.
Would you say Trump is the big dividing factor between
Yes.
you and some of these voters or attendees?
I would say that. I would also say there's two other things. One, they don't understand or know what mainstream Republicans of Washington really is. They choose not to. Two, we've been around so long that we can say we have Governor Evans, Ralph Monroe, Kim Wyman, Sam Reed, a lot of people in leadership in the state of Washington politics. And so there's this idea that we're elitists.
Martina says she was also at the state convention as a delegate from Grant County, where Moses Lake is. But because she didn't support her colleagues' favored candidates, such as Trump-supporting Semi Bird or Trump-endorsed Jared Sessler, she felt like she was on the outside, looking in.
I ended up being a delegate. I was really fighting for that because I wanted to be able to vote for Dave Reichert as a delegate. Well, the group of delegates, the Republican Party, Grant County Republican Party, didn't really accept me. Yeah. Because I wasn't Byrd, I wasn't for Jared, I felt like an outsider. And I'll admit the first day of the convention, I stayed as an outsider. In other words, I was there, but I was doing my own thing. Not to mention I had my booth. But I'm going to do what I want to do, regardless of the possibility of the backlash. So the second day, I did end up sitting with my group, even though it was uncomfortable. They weren't friendly. But I will say, though, that afterwards, somebody within the leadership of the county party did let me know that they were appreciative of my involvement, especially with the difficulties surrounding that convention. And so that's why, to me, for my own personal reasons, my own personal outlook, mental well-being, I need to be able to stand up for what I want to stand up for and not worry about the ramifications.
Can you take us back to 2015, 2016 when Trump was gaining prominence on the national stage? And what were your thoughts on Trump? And then did you end up voting for him?
I was really worried about his ability to get people to just go along with him, even if it wasn't the truth. He really turned a lot of people against Mexicans. I think his intent was about illegal immigrants, but he painted with a wide strokes. And so everybody who looked Mexican was a bad Mexican or an illegal. I work at a hospital. We had a victim who came in who she had been stranded at the side of the road. And she had called her husband for help. And while she was on the phone with him, some man stopped, and she thought he was going to help her. His words to her were, "You're Mexican, aren't you?" And then he tried to shoot her. Thankfully, the gun didn't go off, but he did beat her up pretty good. And so she ended up in our hospital for treatment. But
well, I said drug dealers, I said killers, and I said rapists.
What he says can become very dangerous. And I've seen that. And I wish people would understand that. There's this underlying hatred that he promotes, but it's explained off as, well, he's just doing what we all would want to do, is be able to say what we want to say. Not as my president. It's really difficult to have to fight against your own community. We should be able to make our own decisions. And yes, there are Republicans, Washington State Republicans, that are not going to support Trump. In my consideration of how I cast my vote, neither candidate is worthy of my vote.
If Trump is elected, what do you think happens to Washington's Republican Party?
As much as people love Trump, him being on the ticket really negatively affects us here in Washington State as Republicans. I think people are going to need to look seriously at the direction that they're headed, and there'll be a change. Will it be a change more towards thinking about the state overall, separate from the national scene, Or will it be a change even more so towards Trump? If we can't elect any Republicans, especially if they were supported and endorsed by the state party, then the speculation is that the chair will be gone, because the whole point of him being in chair is to elect Republicans. It takes those of us who sit quietly by, just waiting for Trump to not be on scene any longer, to see what happens next. Those people need to stand up more. There needs to be moderation. There needs to be balance. And that's how I direct myself, how I engage. People can try and say, well, you're Republican now, Deanna, so you gotta vote R, you gotta watch Fox News. You know, like there's this little kit that I suddenly get presented because I'm now a Republican. No, I'm a person first, and I'm going to vote that way. The majority of the time, I think, is going to be mostly Republican or a conservative viewpoint. But there are going to be times where it's not. And if they want to take my Republican card away for that, they can try. But I'm not giving it up so easily.
Deanna Martinez was not at the state Republican Party's election night event in Bellevue. Their attendees had a range of views, but overall, the Republican card definitely bore the name Donald Trump.
Donald Trump currently has a 4 million vote lead nationwide.
That's next time on Northwest Reports. Thanks for listening to The Elephant in the Room by Northwest Reports. We'll be releasing 2 more episodes in the series, with the next one publishing December 11th. This episode was reported and produced by me, Maliha Sayed, and Sarah Bernard. The story editor was Ryan Famuliner. Our executive producer is Sarah Menzies. You can subscribe to Northwest Reports wherever you listen. And whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. Also, if you would like to support the work we do at Cascade PBS, whether it's our lineup of podcasts, the video docuseries we stream every week, or the in-depth reporting we deliver every day, go to cascadepbs.org/membership. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive complete access to the on-demand programming of Cascade PBS. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit cascadepbs.org. That's also where you'll find The Elephant in the Room. Northwest Reports is a product of Cascade PBS. I'm Maliha Sayed. We'll be back soon with another episode.